What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to talk about WEN. WEN is a company that does a good job of getting you tools and different classes that gives you the capabilities of those classes at a price point that most people can afford. But in some cases, like this, you get what you paid for. When I originally bought this saw, I was working with a 9-inch saw. And what I found is that bandsaws in a 9-inch class really didn't have a lot of power or capability. If you're going to buy a bandsaw in a 9-inch class, I just recommend going with a scroll saw because the capabilities aren't that much different. Except the scroll saw, you can take the blade off and put it through a hole and work from the middle. So if you're going that small, go with the scroll saw instead. So I wanted to upgrade my bandsaw and try to go up to the 14-inch class because I wanted the more capabilities of doing resaw work and even larger bandsaw boxes if I wanted to do that. So I started shopping around and I found that a lot of the saws that are in the 14-inch class was out of my price range at that time. A lot of them ran between $1,100 and $1,800. And then in came WEN, which made a saw in that class in the ballpark of $800 at that time. For the most part, this saw does a good job at delivering on the capabilities of a 14-inch saw. In fact, it has a wider cut throat than most saws in the 14-inch class of a little over 8 inches. A lot of other saws in the 14-inch class has a 6-inch cut depth. But the saw is a little bit underpowered for cutting through that much room, which at that price point, that's to be expected. Also, it's a little bit difficult to try to adjust this system to get good straight cuts, which also, something like that's a little bit to be expected whenever you're in that price range too. But what I didn't expect was that the bearing system would be so bad on this machine. And that's why I'm making this video today, to talk about the bearing setup on this machine. So for the bearing setup, you'll find a set of bearings up here at the top, which rides above your workpiece, and you'll find another set of bearings that look very much the same at the bottom that's right underneath the table. Now what these bearings do is they guide the blade, they make it go straight through your piece, hopefully giving you a nice straight cut. This setup here is a little bit difficult to get adjusted to have a perfectly straight cut, but it generally does a decent job. The bearing that's behind the blade is a little bit of a weak spot. Now pulling this top kit off, it's very simple. You just twist that guy right there, move it back, and you take an Allen key, put it in this guy right here, loosen that bad boy up, and then it should tighten that up so that it should pop right off like that. And I already messed with the bearing here, but you see this back bearing back here. Now your blade rides firmly against this back bearing. And this here is the bearing that I have a problem with. So the way this bearing setup works is the back of that blade rides right in the middle of that bearing. And what happens over time, and not as much time as I think it should be, that bearing cuts in half. Even though you're not really supposed to put a bunch of pressure into the blade, you're supposed to let that blade do the cutting. That little bit of pressure with this little tiny thin wall bearing, which it is super thin, it don't take much time for that blade to start wearing through the sidewall of this bearing. For me, I think I had a total of 10 to 15 hours of cut time on the saw before this bearing started wearing out. And it's the same thing with the bottom bearing. The bottom setup is exactly the same. The bottom bearing needs to be replaced too. So you take this screw off right here, and that's how that bearing comes out. And of course there's supposed to be a snap ring right in here, which I have here, and that snap ring is difficult to get off. Like, not difficult like as in figuring out how to get it off, but I got these tiny little snap ring pliers for it, and even these things have a hard time getting a grip on it to be able to get it off of the bearing and release it. So yeah, that was a struggle. A lot of other setups, they'll have a bearing that looks like these ones behind it, and that blade will ride basically like this on that bearing, which I think is a much better setup because some of these bearings come with a thicker flange on the side, which gives you a lot more material to wear out before the bearing goes bad. Where in this case, you got like a millimeter of material before you're in the bearing and it's ruined. And that blade is just riding in one spot on this bearing. I believe these bearings are made so that whatever's riding on them rides the whole width of the bearing. But in this case, they just have like a millimeter thick blade just pressing up against it. And I don't think that these bearings are made for that. So that's one part of the issue. I went to WEN, I went to Amazon, I went to eBay, I went everywhere looking for this bearing, thinking, okay, if this thing wears out so fast, they're definitely going to have a part number. They're definitely going to be selling these like crazy. You're going to be able to buy them anywhere you go to buy parts for your WEN bandsaw. And that's not the case. I could not find a WEN bearing anywhere that WEN itself was selling. So I ended up having to look for a bearing that was that fit the same dimensions that this is, and I found these, and I'm pretty sure it's the exact same bearing. This one's obviously burned up pretty bad, but as far as the construction, it's exactly the same. So I'm going to replace it with these. I will put a link to these down in the description below if you're having the same problem. That way it's easier for you to find them, because I spent so much time looking for these and I couldn't find a bearing from WEN, and I drug my feet on it. I did a lot of cuts on this machine that I shouldn't have, because that's the other thing. If me doing more cuts on this machine, I started to cut through the shaft for this bearing. So really I need to replace this shaft too. Crap. But yeah, me dragging my feet on it and then using the saw when I really shouldn't have been, I caused a little bit more damage. So I should try to find this part for the next time that bearing goes bad, which ought to be pretty fast. Try to find a replacement for this too. I did find that they were selling the entire setup, but I don't want to spend like $40 just for a $1 bearing that I need to replace. So I didn't pull the trigger and do that, which to replace this part I might have to anyway. If you know of a bearing kit that will fit this machine that is different and is an upgrade from this, please do me a favor and put that in the comments below, because I would love to upgrade this bearing kit on the top and the bottom to have a better setup, maybe an easier to adjust setup to get more accurate cuts out of this machine. But yeah, then this bearing here, it's the new bearing, fits perfect, rolls perfect. I just need to put my snap ring on. There it is. But at least it's pretty simple and easy to replace. And when you do find the bearing, which it's not the bearing, the WEN bearing, it's just kind of a whoever made a bearing that fits this same setup, at least they're cheap and easy to buy. Yeah, I'll replace these bearings, and rolls pretty good. Replace these bearings and then try to recalibrate this thing, see if I can get some straight cuts out of it. I did have to turn that around a little bit so that the little notch that I had in there from the blade going through the bearing is on the opposite side, so hopefully that helps out with the life of it a little bit. Otherwise that thing's probably going to be done in like a day, 1 hour of use. But that has been my experience with the WEN 14-inch bandsaw. Overall, I don't think this is a bad bandsaw. I just think it has some bad components. And I really don't think it would be hard for a company to step in and make a bearing upgrade kit specifically for this saw, so that people like myself that own this saw can purchase it from them. Because it definitely would make a world of difference for this machine. But that is it for this review or complaint video, whatever you want to call it. So while I finish changing out these bearings, go ahead and hit that like button if you like this video, and check out the channel. I have some woodworking content over there as well. Videos like this actually is not my norm. Maybe I'll make it my norm if you guys like content like this, but for now, go over there and check out the woodworking content. In the description below, I'll post an affiliate link for these bearings, as well as for the tools and for the bandsaw if you're interested in that. But until next time, make something awesome.